We are on our last plenary session. So in this plenary session, we will conclude all of our discussion with talking about the future. The main theme of this plenary session is the way forward, recommendations and conclusions for ASEAN in disaster management. Therefore, I would like to invite all four moderators to come to the stage and share the insights of each thematic sessions. Dr. Pedro Basabe, Dr. Philip J. Fermonte, Ms. Pam Titan, and Mr. Drasko Kragulija. For all moderators, please come back to the stage for this last plenary session. Dr. Pedro Basabe and Mr. Drasko Kragulija, you may also join to the stage. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, here are our moderators of the symposium. They will conclude and also give you the insights of each thematic sessions that we have already seen through these past 2 days. So please give a big round of applause.
Thank you, MC. I'm tasked by the Secretariat to kind of moderate the moderator. And then each moderator will be given about 5 minutes to summarize and put forward some policy recommendations that came out from the sessions. And then we'll open with a short, not Q&A, it's just if any one of you would like to put some highlights that you think is missing from the report from the moderators, then it will be accommodated. Now, because Ambassador Antoine, the moderator of the first thematic session, is not here, I have the luxury to read out what has been written from the very first session as follow. Number one, the first presenter, Dr. Dixit, highlighted the need of ASEAN, as also came out in the last session, ASEAN to extend its knowledge and partnership into the other regions, including the South Asia region. Number two, risk-informed policy and investment needs to be implemented in the government program as well. And secondly, the other speakers highlight that sometimes disasters are not occurring in empty space. There are political contexts that needs to be taken into account, and that would also affect the preparedness and even the later stage from the rehabilitation and reconstruction and so on. So all stakeholders must realize this situation and context, but of course, human life is needed to be put on the top priority. The speaker from Japan, Dr. Yoshino, brought an interesting idea from economic standpoint to promote green finance for disaster risk reduction. He suggested the possibility to impose tax from unwanted waste for sustainable development that will benefit disaster management. Whether or not this is applicable for the Southeast Asian region, that's another discussion, but it's, I think, a good idea to be explored by people and agencies and policymakers in Southeast Asia, how to incorporate tax regime into disaster management. And the last speaker of that session presented the idea that in most cases, disasters cause economic losses. That also increases due to human activities or development. So the view of development also, I think, need to be incorporated into disaster management discussion. Now, overall, there are some important takeaways from the first session. Number one, better preparedness, transparency, and trust are part of good governance. Number two, while community approach understood as the way to go, however, there is criticism that ASEAN customary in top-down approach, then we need much effort to shift the paradigm into a more bottom-up approach. Number three, green approach is preferred compared to gray approach to emergency responses. Number four, nature solution as part of green approach to disaster management. Lastly, better information and better knowledge sharing is needed that consider local communities and existing social networks in disaster response. That's highlights from session panel one. Now I like to move the microphone to the moderator of the second session.
Thank you, colleagues. So thank you, first of all, to the organizers of this substantive symposium. We also appreciate the openness and constructive discussion. For example, the last panel, including on partnership and leadership, by the way. So congratulations for that. So the second session, it was devoted to early warning systems and effective disaster response operations through advanced technologies and innovation. So, first of all, it was recalled how the Southeast Asia region, which is a beautiful region, also suffers because of the disasters. In addition to the millions of people affected every year, last year, and we recall the report of the UNSCAP, that in 2019, the region lost 86.5 billions of US dollars because of disasters, in particular due to drought, flood, and cyclones. So all of this is more or less 96% of the whole losses, which means that we need to work more in this hydromet hazard, of course, without forgetting the other ones. And in particular, those slowed onset disaster, and one of the previous panelists mentioned that we need also to do more on drought. Second point, it is to move from early warning systems to early actions. So one thing where the technical part has to link to the actions to have better prepared, actions to respond in time, and of course, early warning system in order to reduce the impact of disasters. Number three, that it was also discussed, is that the early warning system has to be people-centered in order to reach the last mile for every single of the levels of the society to know what is going on. So to this end, we need communication, we need satellite information, but in particular, we need also the engagement of the private sector, which is an example that was given for the Cambodia with the main enterprises. I mean, there is any single farmer can receive the information regarding the floods in this case. In the case of drought, is different, because in the case of drought, has to be also the information about the triggers. Number four, it is the early warning system has to be linked to the political processes, because in the end, this early warning system has to link to, for example, the decision-making for the evacuation. So it's the technical and scientific part to link to the political level, the NDMOs, in order for them to release the evacuation process, for example, in this case. And of course, without saying that, it also deals with the coordination mechanism, the planning, the economics, etc., everything regarding governance. In number five, it was quite substantive discussion, and I share with you the interconnectivity, the complementarity that exists between disaster reduction and climate change adaptation. And I think this is the way forward. The way forward is that we not only see disaster reduction and related management, but linked to other type of emerging trends that it is the climate change adaptation, in which also to have a common agenda and portfolio for the Southeast Asia region. And the number 4, I already somehow mentioned, it is the involvement, a strategic involvement with other partners, without forgetting, I mean, the governments, with the intergovernmental organizations, the academia, the scientists, but as well in particular also the private sector. I think we need to do more regarding the private sector. And maybe just to finalize, that also exists a substantive coordination and guidance for the how to deal between the effectiveness, the civil and military coordination, which, by the way, the ASEAN and the AHA Center, they know very well. So that is from this panel 2. Thank you.
And I might update on the panel 3, which was about the strengthening community resilience and multi-stakeholder partnership. Like the other 2 panelists, there are a number of recommendations, and I think it will also probably take a day or 2 to try to compile them under the policy recommendations in certain areas. But let me start with the first question that was for us: how to create an enabling environment for advancing the localization agenda on disaster management in ASEAN. There are a number of challenges which are being documented, and out of that, there are a number of recommendations as well for the future work of the ASEAN Secretariat, as much as the AHA Center and other partners. So support NGO and coordination to ensure local, national, and international NGOs are engaged as partners in disaster management from community level to national planning. Number 2, ensure national and regional policies and practices create space for principled, independent, neutral, impartial humanitarian action by NGOs when it's needed most. Number 3, reinforce the role civil society plays as the foundation of a people-centered approach to disaster management, where NGOs complement other actors in key areas such as protection, rights, gender, and diversity. Number 4, work with NGOs and their grassroots networks to help those providing assistance be more accountable to the people most affected by the crisis. 5, support multi-stakeholder processes to develop a shared understanding of what localization means and how progress is measured. Number 6, new strategies for multi-stakeholder approach, such as Pentahelix, which is a framework which optimizes the results of activities, of disaster management activities through multi-stakeholder engagement and the elements which need to be in all the thinking, the 5 elements from business community, media, government, and academia. And number 7, create an enabling environment for advancing localization on disaster management through education, as we heard. Education starting in early ages and then being governed well has a potential to change culture and attitudes. Of course, we know it's a longer process and it takes usually a generation before we can see the results there. And the last one, it's on number 8, financial and institutional support to businesses for and not for profit, which use innovation and technology proactively in cooperation with communities in the last mile to reduce the poverty. Transfer of knowledge is ethical and sustainable, and this aspect this might ask for the creating such a business environment, political and economic as much as regulatory, that is conducive to startups and small businesses, removing red tape and bureaucracies. On the second one, where we were discussing about what are the existing modalities that have been had by the ASEAN to foster a strong partnership on the culture of resilience between the communities and private sector, or what kind of partnerships should we have or urgently have in the near future. Recommendations are share similar cultures and hazard risks, understand of each partner, as the last group was also talking about partnerships. There are a number of principles how the partnerships are being developed, but I guess without repeating what the previous panelists said, I'll just go through several of these recommendations that is being stated by the panelists. Increasing capacity of the non-state actors in ASEAN, like faith-based organizations, NGOs, community groups, and civil society, are also experiencing various and complex hazard events. So many partners have different views, but the views which can be complementary to the overall humanitarian action. Existing collaboration, those they are working well are usually predicated by having pre-existing agreements which are understanding and which understand each other, the benefits and disadvantages as much as the opportunities for furthering partnerships, which is also established trust and compatibility. Number 4 is the partnership in preparedness for community resilience needs to be really going from government to NGOs, from donors to NGOs, from NGOs to NGOs. And in the end, it needs to be really centered on the organizations who are doing the last mile work. One of the recommendations, as well as we heard in the presentations from Dr. Aiko, from the Tohoku universities, some of these practical skills that help in the disaster management, which is strengthen map reading skills, and without going into the detail what that means, it just makes every one of us, and starting from the early ages, not just being able to read the maps, but also being able to understand what does that mean in the sense of disaster management, what are the risks, and what you should be actually looking for when you are reading just a normal topographical map. 6, scale up action at whole of economy, national level, and at ASEAN wide level to support disaster resilience of poorest communities. And number 7, private sector operators are willing and enthusiastic to partner with people, willing and enthusiastic partner of people and communities, as we heard in the presentation from ESCAP, complementary strategies, for example, to augment existing early warning systems. And then the last one was the question about how the local wisdoms and traditional knowledge should be positioned in regional disaster management vis-a-vis international instruments. And recommendations here are to preserve officially the local wisdom. We had the story, the Smog story, which told us a lot about how much was being forgotten from the tsunami in 2004. And those are important stories to be told from one generation to another one. So to find, again, in a different words, knowledge management, but of those stories which are not necessarily based on data, rather on people, memories and experiences. Number 2, update local wisdom and traditional knowledge by integrating the latest local information to transmit the next generation by considering the new environment and new ways of communication, be that social media, understanding how the generations of today communicate and what is the best way to communicate our message in disaster management and risk reduction. Utilize local wisdom in school, DRR education by the local educational agencies, and different ways how to go about that. Adaptive management and flexibility in funding mechanisms and programs. Local leadership is important, and the ownership of the programs and mechanisms. Integrating local knowledge and wisdom in disaster management. Engaging traditional leaders throughout the process. We often say that, but I think we also miss that point in the rushing into the supporting the emergencies. And the last one, coming back to what I just mentioned, knowledge management at the community level. And that would be from the panel 3, and like I said, we will try to group it into the particular policy advice. Thank you.
Thank you. So section 5 is about effective recovery to build back better. I can summarize the discussions into 5 points. The first is really the need to define the goal of recovery, which is to build back better, moving to resilient and sustainable development, and putting people at the heart of recovery. So there are a few key takeaways for this item. One is that early recovery is important to restore life and livelihood, but medium-term and long-term recovery provide the opportunity to transitions to resilient and sustainability, addressing the underlying causes of risk, and then creating enabling conditions for people to adapt and move on. So building back better is going to bring in new regulation standards, new technologies, as well as the legal, institutional, and social and structural changes. A very important key principle in setting the goal for recovery is the people at the heart of it. So it's a non-negotiable kind of principle that everything recovery is doing is to reduce vulnerability and strengthen the resilience of people, moving them towards like better livelihood and opportunities and leaving no one behind. So there was also a key point about defining resilience. Resilience is not just like helping people to withstand the disasters, but also to bring changes and moving forward. And there are good examples of such recovery setting goal in the regions. The second point is the need to develop recovery strategy and plan and the elements that we have to take care, into consideration. The first point is that there is no ready-made type of recovery strategy. It has to be specific to different hazards. It has to be specific to local context. And with the increasing human-induced kind of like risk drivers in the regions, there is a need to have a paradigm shift in rethinking recovery strategy in the regions. The scale of disaster shouldn't be the main determinations of addressing recovery strategy. Because the relatively considered small scale but recurrent disasters are increasing in the regions, and we are not like even sure if we are prepared for that. So in doing recovery strategy, key elements like maps, statistics, data informations, damage and loss assessment, need assessment, and others, as well as the readiness of communities, the readiness of businesses are very important to bring on board. Again, everyone needs to be part of the process with the understanding that communities are very different. They're different in cultures, they're different in wisdom, local knowledge, and others. And the process to bring them together has to really have this good understanding and foundations in place. For this, the data informations, the interpretation of data, the access to data for everybody to make decisions is very important. The third point is about gender responsive recovery. So I really like the speaker saying that gender disaster impacts are not gender neutral. So disaster risk management and recovery shouldn't be. So women and girls should be at the heart of recovery, moving from the need-based assistance to gender responsive actions, reducing their vulnerability, increasing their resilience, and empowering them to take leadership. The bad news is the ASEAN disaster risk management framework is still gender blind, reflecting in the data that we have, reflecting in the fact that we don't have mechanism to create, like to enable women leaderships and capacity building. But the good news is there are concrete recommendations, catalytic action that we can take that help the ASEAN communities to address both the disaster issues and the social inequality, which actually drive the disaster risk in the regions. So the third point is that experience from recovery tell that business as usual will not work. So we have example of the anti-corruption movement in the post-Aceh recovery. We have example of how legislations and institutional change have to be made to make sure that widowers have access to their own houses after their husband die. So all of this need to come into what we call as preparedness for recovery, because that preparedness is very important for us to anticipate what is going to be required in the recovery strategy setting and planning, as well as putting in place this policy, institutional framework, capacity, as well as baseline data, which is very crucial for need assessment during disasters. Last but not least is a recommendation for the ASEAN to create the network of the National Disaster Risk Reduction Platform to share knowledge and experience and to advance the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. There's two more that I'm going to read out. The report from session 4 on the economic aspect of disasters. A key finding from the session 4 the economic cost of disaster will escalate over time to an increasing amount of population at risk and major disasters. And it also exacerbated by climate change. Now, the challenge of disaster management and financing is a lack of investment and political commitment. Insurance scheme mainly focuses on post-disaster recovery assistance and largely ignores early actions and preparedness. The sustainability aspects in investment scheme needs to be considered, and partnership with private sectors is paramount in developing the proper parameters for insurance scheme. Various interpretations on disasters, some focus on natural catastrophe, pandemic, and or cyber risk. This is caused by different ability and scope that stakeholders focus on. There are some possible policy recommendations that can be formulated. Number one, there's the urgency to build political will in shifting perception from focusing mainly on post-disaster relief to include pre-disaster risk reduction and preparedness. Number two, multi-stakeholders partnerships approach to engage private sectors, bank, construction company, microfinance startups, etc., multi-sectoral government bodies, civil society, and academia to create robust upstream to downstream cooperation. Number three, policymakers on insurance schemes for disaster financing need to tap into the private sector to create an inclusive insurance market that covers vulnerable communities in disaster-prone areas. Number four, as small and medium enterprises contribute to most of Asia's economy, it is important for governments to protect and help them to prepare and recover from disaster. For example, business continuation program can be very helpful in post-disaster situation, while disaster preparedness is crucial in pre-disaster. Policymakers can reach wider SMEs involvement through no tax initiative, using app-based and also pop culture socialization. Lastly, diversifying the humanitarian donor system to seek and engage non-traditional donor in the private sectors and banking industry. That's the notes from fourth session. Now, lastly, the one that I chair, the last session, I think it's still fresh in mind, so I don't have time yet to formulate, but there are at least four takeaways from the last session. Number one, multinational networks of non-government organization is needed. Also needs to involve, similar to other session, private sector involvement. Number two, collaboration runs from global to very local levels. As such, there is a need for strong local capacity building. Number three, as far as institution is concerned, and within the ASEAN context, ASEAN disaster management effort needs to encompass the three pillars of ASEAN: the ASEAN Economic Community, ASEAN Political Security Community, and ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community. Number five, engaging CSO is needed, civil society organization, to be in line with the community-based approach that ASEAN has been committed to as a regional organization. Number four, there is a need to expand collaboration between regional organizations. Currently, ASEAN has a strong collaboration with EU, and that needs to be complemented by other regional organizations. I think that's all for the last session. Now we have few minutes for comments. If there is burning issues that you need to be included in the moderator's report, we will be happy to accommodate. One or two comments from the floor are welcome, if there is any. No? This is the ASEAN way, everyone agrees? So thank you very much for the moderators and also for the participants who have been actively involved in the discussion. Before I return the microphone, on behalf of CSIS, we are very honored to be chosen as a knowledge partner by the ASEAN Secretariat. I hope this kind of collaboration between the ASEAN Secretariat with think tanks and civil society organization will continue and will be deepened in the future. Thank you very much. I return the microphone.
Thank you to all of our great moderators of the 6 thematic sessions that we have already gone through in this past 2 days. Before we move on, due to the huge requests of the slides and notes, we would like to give everyone a link to access. So here is the link, bit.ly/ASEAN HLSDM. So you can access these links for the slides and also the notes. However, specifically for the notes, we will finalize it soon, hopefully tonight. So you have the completed slides on this link. It has been a great 2 days for our symposium, 6 insightful thematic sessions, and also a very epic closing plenary session. We hope that the symposium has really bring together different key actors in disaster management for greater collaborations in Southeast Asia and beyond. To close this ASEAN high-level symposium on disaster management, we would like to invite Deputy Secretary General for ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community, or ASCCD, His Excellency Kung Fook, to give closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be the last one. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm good afternoon. On behalf of the ASEAN Secretariat, I would like to sincerely thank each one of you for your active participation and significant contribution to this ASEAN High-Level Symposium on Disaster Management. It has been indeed our great honors and privilege that the ASEAN Secretariat has been able to serve as a good venue of this symposium. During these past 2 days, we have generated a wealth of information and experience in this symposium. All the presentation and discussions made during the symposium were very informative and enlightening. The common concerns on addressing disaster problem holistically and on mainstreaming disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation into development strategies were succinctly pointed. In addition, the advancement of information and technology for hazard mapping and vulnerability assessment, women and community empowerment for effective response, adoption of the DRR plan at all levels as a critical undertaking to reduce risks and vulnerabilities were also significantly emphasized. I am delighted to learn that the participants have also managed to discuss challenges, gaps, best practices, and success stories from various stages of disaster, including prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. The diverse background of the presenters and participants and the constructive feedbacks that they provided have clearly demonstrated that disaster is a matter of common concern. Now that we have gained new and useful knowledge from the symposium, I hope some key points from the discussion could significantly contribute to the policy-making process in our respective countries. We have learned here at the last 2 days that humanitarian needs in our region has been immensely growing. As such, traditional approach in responding and reducing disaster risk to meet the immediate needs of the affected victim is no longer enough. ASEAN has made extraordinary progress in the past decade in saving lives and reducing the numbers of casualties. However, the economic impacts of disaster on our nation have been tremendous and is highly increasing. Many countries in Southeast Asia are still struggling to withstand the adverse impact of disaster, as was made clear to us yesterday. Many of those countries are also losing quite numbers of percentage of their GDP annually to natural disaster. Unless we can reduce those losses, the task of government to achieve economic growth target becomes extremely difficult. Equally important, the natural disasters we experience most often, particularly floods, typhoons, and droughts, affect the same countries over and over again. Those communities are invariably among the poorest in their respective countries, and such recurring disaster will keep them poor. Such situation can no longer be acceptable to us. We in ASEAN as one community must find ways to break the cycle. Our intervention in disaster management must not only be targeted to meet the immediate needs of disaster victims, but more importantly, to reduce the impact of disaster and ensure that ASEAN people will have an increased capacity to withstand the future impact of disaster. To do this, we must deal with disaster more holistically, more comprehensively, and by taking into account the emerging threat and hazard that may potentially affect our regions. Synergizing disaster management policy in the context of economic development planning is important. As the ASEAN Secretary General mentioned in his opening remark yesterday, I also would like to encourage all partners to support ASEAN efforts in strengthening disaster financing resilience. We need to ensure that the DRR policy can be integrated into the economic and development planning and at the same time contribute to building nation resilience. ASEAN economy will grow more rapidly in the years to come, and our policy shall be able to contribute more fully to the growth of their nations. We shall always endeavor to assist government and peoples in the regions and facilitate among them the exchange of disaster experience, information, and best practices more effectively and efficiently. As ASEAN is now in the process of reviewing the current ADMEA work programs and to develop the new one for 2021-2025, we should be able to discuss further with our member state on how the outcome of this symposium can contribute to this process. We shall also expect and welcome feedbacks on how ASEAN disaster management approach can be applied according to the context and needs of our ASEAN member state. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to remind you that the symposium is only one of the starting points toward the realization of ASEAN resilient community building. The efforts must be sustained, and we count on you to safeguard this process. To conclude my remark, I would like to again thank the government of the People's Republic of China for their support to ASEAN, to all the distinguished speakers and moderators, the participants, and the organizing team who did so much to make sure that this symposium took place and achieved success despite of the challenges that we are facing during these times. Also, my appreciations to our knowledge partner for providing necessary support to make this symposium possible. This is the closing ceremony of this symposium, but I hope this closing will not be the end, but the beginning of our concerted efforts for more effective disaster management in our regions. For those who travel back home tomorrow, I wish you a pleasant and safe flight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for the wonderful closing remark. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we are now reaching the end of the two-day conference. On behalf of the ASEAN Secretariat, we would like to thank you for your active contribution to the discussion throughout the last 2 days. We sincerely hope that ASEAN High-Level Symposium on Disaster Management has achieved its major objectives to bring together many actors in disaster management for better collaborations. We would like to once again thank the government of the People's Republic of China and also CSIS Indonesia as our knowledge partner. This marks the end of ASEAN High-Level Symposium on Disaster Management. I'm Cristela Fenishanti. Thank you for coming and have a good day.